Thanks for joining us for another episode of Conversations with Dr. Gosalia. Today, I'm joined by one of my old friends, Dr. John Coverstone, who's up in Minnesota. John, today it's 85 degrees and sunny down here in Los Angeles. How are things going in Minnesota?
There's a really cold wind blowing. I think it's going to be a high of about 9 degrees tomorrow.
9,
yes.
Got
is with a positive sign. So we're not entirely disappointed by that.
Oh, almost t-shirt and shorts weather.
Almost.
Well, hey, thanks for joining us. A lot of people know who you are already, but you've been involved with AAA, with the Minnesota Academy of Audiology, with the Sight and Hearing Foundation, with the American Board of Audiology. Currently, your role as director of the Audiology Practice Standards Organization. You've been involved in so many leadership positions. Before we get into all that, can you kind of start us off with how did you get into audiology and why get into all these leadership positions?
Oh boy, these are our favorite stories, aren't they? Because hardly anybody got into audiology on a direct path. I think I know about 3 people that actually knew what an audiologist was before they got into college and knew that's what they were going to do. But like so many of us, I took a different path. When I first went to college, I thought I wanted to be a tax accountant. And so I was taking accounting classes and pre-law type stuff and discovered very, very quickly that was not what I wanted to do. I could not see myself sitting at a desk running numbers, and it just kind of married my propensity for numbers. I've always been good with numbers, with my fascination of the law, which I have today. But I ended up leaving and going to a broadcast school and going into the broadcast profession and into radio, in fact. And went back to college later on for a degree in speech communication, only because the local college, Portland State University, didn't have the journalism program anymore. They had cut that program. And I didn't really want to leave town because I love Portland so much. And so speech communication just happens to be in the same department with speech and hearing science in that school. And so we all had a requirement to take a couple classes in speech and hearing science if you wanted your communication degree. And I'm trying to remember what classes I took. I don't think they were classes that I even really liked that much, but it kind of piqued my interest. And so I took a couple more classes and ended up double majoring and graduating with degrees in both speech communication and speech and hearing science. And what I thought I wanted to do up into my senior year of college was to work with professional speakers. I thought I still have this focus on the broadcast industry. And I really like this speech stuff in the voice part of it, at least. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, there was one faculty member who had an interest in those things, and he retired my senior year. And so all of a sudden, we have a complete faculty, and many audiologists will appreciate this, and speech pathologists too, who really had no interest in teaching anything except how to work with kids in schools. And that was not a prospect for me. And so I started looking around saying, well, what else could I do? Because I won't have a mentor to do this one thing I thought I wanted to do. And it was actually a classmate. Her name was Brittany, who was a year ahead of me and had just gotten into the speech graduate program. She said, I could really see you doing audiology. You should look at that. And so I did. And well, here I am today.
And currently you're the owner of Sentient Healthcare. Right. A big conglomerate out there in Minnesota. And
conglomerate of one, yes.
Conglomerate of one. But you have a few businesses under there, and we'll talk about those in a few minutes. But you're married to an audiologist, Kirsten.
Yes.
And how is that? There's a few audiology couples out there that we know of. How do you separate work from just being married and having a family life?
Well, I think it helps us for one thing because we're working in entirely different areas. And Kirsten has no interest whatsoever in being in private practice. She loves babies. She wants to work with babies. I actually love babies too. But my love of audiology is a little broader than that. And so this is a good place for me. I've worked in many places in the profession and industry. And now I have a practice where I serve kind of pediatric all the way up through, as long as they last. Right. And so that's where I enjoy practicing audiology. And so we get to hear each other's gripes. She gets to hear about all the wonderful insurance stuff that I used to deal with before I went out of network and running a business and dealing with all the patients I deal with. And I get to hear her, gripe about all the other audiologists that are delaying identification of babies and things like that, and how we could be improving. No, not really, but well, a little bit. But we're talking about different things, and we kind of keep each other updated, which is kind of nice too. So she's really on top of course, anything JCIH, because she's the co-chair of JCIH. And I also kind of keep my hands in pediatrics more on the clinical side and the guideline side and things like that. So we kind of keep each other updated on things that are of mutual interest. And I don't know, I guess it just ends up being very complementary for us, at least.
Yeah, and you talk about guidelines, so which is a great segue, because the next question I want to ask you was about leadership positions, and you've been involved in so many organizations that I talked about in the beginning. We actually spent time together on the American Board of Audiology Board of Governors, and then most recently on the Audiology Practice Standards Organization, where the overall goal is to create and update all the clinical standards for audiology. Tell us a little bit more about why choose leadership, and how do we get more audiologists involved in leadership?
So for me, I know it's just about passion. Anyone who knows me well, including you, know that I don't jump into anything with one foot, right? And that's just me. That's just who I am. If I'm getting into something, I'm getting in all the way. It's all or nothing for me, and that's always kind of been the case. And that's just who I am. 20 years ago, when I first got into tinnitus, I went out and bought every book on tinnitus I could possibly find. I bought psychology books on tinnitus, which I'm actually really glad I did, because many of the methodologies that we had out there for treating tinnitus at the time kind of came up short in that area. And I felt blessed that I had that perspective. But then professionally, I've always been one where if I see a need, I want to address it. And I think a lot of us are that way. We get into patient care because we care about patients, and we see something with them. We want to address that. We are the kind of people, a lot of us, most of us, who kind of want to fix problems. We're problem solvers. That's a diagnostic side of us. And then the treatment side, of course, is we want to make people better. We want to improve people's lives. And for me, that really carries over to my professional life too, because I care about the profession. I love this profession. And when I see something that I think is a need, and there's always a need for leadership, there's always a need for time and effort on the state and the national level in audiology. And so I'm rather quick to raise my hand and volunteer my time. And probably couldn't put a percentage to it, but a very significant percentage of my professional life has been dedicated to working with our organizations and volunteering time. And I really enjoy that. I guess if I was independently wealthy, I'd have no problem volunteering all my time. That would not bother me at all. But I'm not. And so therefore I don't, but I'm driven to that, and many other people like yourself are driven to that. And I think the question is, what can we do about those people that aren't as driven to that? And I think there's something out there for everyone. It may be that somebody's never tried taking a position like that. And it's okay if not everybody has a top leadership position. Leaders come in many varieties. Sometimes leaders have supporting roles. And that's not talked about nearly enough. Sometimes your best leaders are not out in front. And we need people to do those other jobs as well. And I wonder sometimes if some people just haven't had a taste of the personal rewards that come with giving of yourself, giving to your profession in that way. Because our profession needs time and effort just as much as it needs donations for things like the PAC and the foundation.
Yeah, I recently spoke with someone who's near and dear to your heart, Dr. Gail Whitelaw, as well.
Absolutely.
And you're almost mirroring what she mentioned as well. And we talked about, if you want to get into leadership, you don't have to join the board to become president. You can actually join a committee and start small, where you kind of learn the lay of the land and decide what's comfortable for you. So, I completely understand those points you made. I was involved with the Arizona Speech and Hearing Association. I wasn't really involved in Washington or Oregon when I lived up in the Pacific Northwest, but I'm involved with California. I recently was invited down to Texas for the Texas Academy of Audiology meeting. And man, they've got their stuff in order.
Yeah.
I actually just talked to California about how Minnesota has their their organization is so well organized, and the amount of content that they're putting out is so fantastic. So I think part of that is also from your inputs from years ago. So tell us, what are some of the organization, this might be hard to answer, but what are some of the leadership roles that you've had in the past that you just really thoroughly enjoyed and you just love the most?
I think still the top of my list, and I'm probably going to get persecuted for saying this because I am the director of an organization, but that ABA board that we were part of, and the people that were on it, and the leadership we had on the staff side from Torrin Brazil was unparalleled in my life. And I like to think of us in a way that we even vocalized to each other at the time, and that was when it was time to work, we worked, and we got to it, and we got serious, and we got stuff done, and we accomplished a lot on that board in the time that we were on it. But when it was done time working, off came the work coats, and on went the party hats, and we had fun. And when I say party, it's not because we all went out and drinking a lot or anything. We just, even in the boardroom, when it was time to relax, we all got along. We liked and even loved each other, and it was just such a great dynamic group, and it was everything I think a board should be. And to be perfectly honest, I think our current board in APSO is very, very much like that. And given the current times and the fact that that at least half of APO's existence has been during the pandemic, the board doesn't see each other and doesn't get together in person quite as much as the ABA board did at that time. But we've got a similar type of atmosphere, and I don't think you could ask for anything better from a board because we're all volunteers. And this shouldn't be something that stresses us out. And it's stressful sometimes, and that's okay because there are sometimes important decisions to make. But it should be an enjoyable experience. And so far and away, those two boards, our MAA boards have been really great too. You don't have quite as big a pool on a state board, and sometimes you take who you can get, and that's not really been a bad thing here in Minnesota because we've had a lot of really wonderful people on that board. But the national boards, we do draw from a bigger pool, and you can be a little more selective, and you can match personalities and things like that. And I think we just did such a tremendous job, not even all on purpose. But we really did with both of those boards, and that's the kind of experience that I would hope everyone would have, serving on a committee or serving on a board, because you deserve it. A volunteer deserves that kind of an experience.
Yeah, that was the ABA board was also the highlight of my leadership career as well. I really felt that was my first time. Not felt that really was my first time on a national board. I never joined the AAA board. I did some stuff on committees for AAA, but never on the board itself. And that set the bar so high for me that every other board position I've had I always tried to kind of mirror that or try to make it feel like what we had on ABA. And it was, I'm with you 100% on that.
Yeah.
One of the companies that you have under Sentient Healthcare is Audiology Talk.
Right.
And I think this goes into leadership as well, because currently there are numerous podcasts on hearing and hearing care, which is fantastic. Everyone's trying to advocate for better hearing and try to get the word out about hearing loss and the things we can do. But you started Audiology Talk, and I think that was the first podcast, the true podcast that actually started years ago, and it's been a huge success. So can you tell us a little bit about Audiology Talk, why you started it, and maybe where it's going?
Yeah. So Audiology Talk goes back to when I barely knew what a podcast was. My background was in radio, and that was my thinking at the time. And as the story goes, I happened to be in clinic and go home for lunch one day. I was about 7.5 miles from home. So occasionally I'd go ahead and go home for lunch if I had some extra time. And I was driving back to the clinic from lunch, and Peter Gabriel came on, whatever I was playing. And he's got that one line in Salisbury Hill. It's, boom, boom, boom. And I thought to myself, wow, I could do a great parody with that song to audiology, boom, 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 something about hearing, or loud noise or something like that. And because that's the kind of thing we used to do in radio. I was at a classic rock FM, within oldies AM that later turned into sports radio. And we do those kind of things for fun sometimes. We parody songs and re-sing the lyrics and what have you. And so it just kind of popped into my head, and I thought that would be really cool. Then I started thinking, just you're driving, you let stuff roll around in your head a little bit, and I started thinking, boy, that it'd be kind of cool to have like an audiology program, because there's so much to talk about. And this was, gosh, must have been 2009, maybe the end of 2009 at that time. And so I had been involved in with AAA and MAA for a number of years at that point. I was on the Sight and Hearing Board, Sight and Hearing Association board here in the Twin Cities, and kind of recognized, how we needed more and better communication in the profession. I felt that was something that we can always use more of, is good communication between colleagues and bringing news and opinion and information to people in new and different ways. And so I thought, boy, that'd be a great radio show. But I knew, we're a profession of what, 15 to 17,000, depending on who you talk to. And so there's just no way that's going to get on like NPR or something. That's not going to work. Not something directed specifically to audiologists. And so I called up my best friend, Dean Flieger, and he was already practicing down in Texas at the time. And I said, hey, I have this idea. And I've heard of this podcast thing. I don't really know much about it, but I've heard of it. And I'm thinking that might actually be something we could do. And he says, I love podcasts. I listen to them all the time. And everywhere I'm driving around, I'm listening to podcasts. And so he really had that experience where I didn't. But I had the technical experience and the radio experience to create a program, know what equipment we needed. Of course, we started out with kind of cheap equipment, and as things broke, because it wasn't very expensive, we buy a little better stuff. And, now we've got this whole investment that's sitting behind me, as well as a mobile one that we sometimes bring to meetings. And we started it. And when we started, it was very, very much in keeping with my background in radio, where we were reading the news, which I did the bulk of, and it was very serious. Think of your evening news host reading the news, and it was that kind of stuff. And eventually, after a year or two of that, we kind of realized, no, podcasts are a little different. They're supposed to be a little edgy, a little looser. And so we kind of relaxed the format and just talked to each other. And that's really when it took off. That's when people started liking it more, I think, probably because they weren't looking for the audiology news. They were looking for conversation. And so now I think next month must be 12 years that we'll have been on the air. And that's kind of ironic because we had some technical problems at the end of last year with the Apple podcast feed and such. We decided a few weeks ago we're just going to redo everything, new website, new feed, and we're going to actually reinvent the podcast itself and do it a bit differently. And so it just so happens that we will probably come out with our first one in March or maybe April, but right around our 12-year anniversary.
Yeah, you've been a staple at AAA. So when you talk about going mobile, we've seen you at AAA with the whole section, audiology talk,
yep,
the whole professional setup, and we can hear you live.
Yeah.
People would walk up and they could hear those conversations live in person. They've been fantastic. Hopefully, as things loosen up and we can get back into in-person meetings, hopefully we'll be able to see you guys out there.
Yeah, that'd be fun. I don't know if we're going to do that or not. I haven't talked to anybody at AAA about that for this year, but yeah, our sound checks when we're at AAA go something like, no, I can't hear you 100 feet away. Go ahead and turn that up. So, and we have a joke that our goal is to annoy as many people as we possibly can, which we have done once or twice in the past. Actually,
I think
we've gotten some pretty dirty looks from people walking by the booth as we've got our voices blaring over these speakers.
Yeah. Well, we actually have a connection even before that. When you say 2009, in 2008, I actually moved up to Vancouver, Washington, and joined a clinic. And actually, there's some history there, which I can't remember the dates, but you can tell us the clinic that I joined. Can you tell us a little bit about that history there that you have?
Well, yeah, that clinic you joined, I did my second clinical rotation there. So my very first one was the Vancouver School for the Deaf. And the second externship that I did was at the the audiology clinic, I think it was called, wasn't it?
Yep.
And that was 1993, 4, probably 1994. and then I did my last year in the VA. Yeah.
Yeah, and I ended up buying that clinic and selling it. And I remember they always told me about this crazy student they had back in the 90s. Must have been somebody else. Must have been
Yeah,
somebody.
must have been. Must
Yeah,
have been.
yeah, yeah. So, we've been talking about all these things. You have a clinic. Can you tell us about what you're up to these days?
Yeah, so I've had a private practice for just about almost 15 years now. I actually have even longer than that, but it's technically been two businesses. Um, and it's been kind of a whole life service. I really do enjoy pediatrics and seeing kids, so I've always done some of that here. But most families are going to children's and the university clinic, things like that. So it's not the bulk of my practice. But more recently, I've really gotten to that point in my career. I'd like to say I'm halfway through after 25 years, because I'm hoping that I'll keep practicing for a while. I don't plan on hanging it up at 67 or something. But I want to spend the second half of my career really doing what gives me joy. And I think I hope everyone gets to that point after they've been practicing this long, where they have the freedom to say, this is what I really want to do, and not be boxed into something that maybe doesn't give them joy as much. Sometimes we got to pay our dues when we're younger, and that's okay. You're also learning a lot. But what I've decided to do is I really want to refocus on working with kids who have tinnitus and sound disorders and even auditory processing disorder. And that's going to be not my only focus, but it's going to be my new focus moving forward. And this is something that I have been kind of on to for a few years, but I didn't really quite get it implemented in 2019. And then we all know what happened in 2020. And so I'm really kind of coming back around to it after really being awakened to this about 6-7 years ago. Before that, the idea of kids having tinnitus wasn't really in any of our consciousness. And that was something that I just stumbled across. And it so happens right about that same time, some research came out of the UK led by David Bagley, and they did a little wider spread epidemiological study than had been done before, and it showed that the significance of tinnitus in kids is marked. 1 in 30 kids approximately has bothersome tinnitus.
Wow.
About a third of kids will experience tinnitus at some point, and that's not surprising. Go to a concert, play your earphones too loud, you can have tinnitus. I suspect that might be part of what that is. But 1 in 30 kids has bothersome tinnitus. That's almost 1 in every classroom in the country. And so that's incredible. And so the need is out there, and I learned about that, and then the very next year, maybe the year after that, it might have been 2018, I actually went over to the UK and attended a British Tinnitus Association meeting, because David Bagley and Claire Benton, wonderful audiologist, also over in the UK, were both presenting, and they had about 3 or 4 different lectures or seminars on pediatric tinnitus. And so I went over there, and that kind of got me excited about it. BTA has some wonderful booklets, and I got them to send me a bunch. And so, but I came back from that, and I called Gail Whitelaw, who I knew also sees a few kids in the clinic here, and they're not focusing on it, but they do get some kids there in the OSU clinic, and said, I want to be the one that moves this forward. I want to pick up this banner in this country, in the US, and I want to be the one that really raises awareness and makes this happen. I'm driven to do that. And so I've been kind of working on that, and I feel like this year is going to be the year where I can really move that forward. And there are people around the country that know about it, but I don't think we have the consciousness yet in the profession, or certainly in the general public, about it. So that's going to be one of my big projects moving forward.
And you were doing some work with ATA. Are you still working with the ATA currently?
I am. So I usually write 3 or 4 articles for them each issue. They publish 3 issues a year. And basically my role is to be the research writer. And so when research is coming out that is relevant to the readers of ATA, then I'll take that and I'll rewrite it at a level that's accessible to your everyday reader, your layperson. And it's a skill that I had to learn. It's actually not easy to take some of these things, and I can't tell you how many times I've been thumbing through neurology textbooks that I have, and cross-referencing stuff on the web to learn about these parts of the brain that we don't normally really have to worry about too much. But so very educational at the same time. It's kind of fun for me. I love that. But yeah, that's been my role with ATA, and gosh, for at least 4 years now.
Yeah, and really appreciate that. I get the magazine every couple months when we get them, and always go front to back. It's
Yeah,
always good
yeah, it's been
information
great.
there. Yeah. So as we talk about audiology, I like to ask everybody, where do you see the future of audiology headed?
Boy, that's quite a question. We are at a crossroads right now, aren't we, though? There's just so much going on in the profession. You just feel like change is inevitable. Change has always been inevitable, right? But I know a lot of people are worried about things like OTC, and people are concerned about reimbursement issues, as they have been for many years, and rightly so. The future of audiology, I think, and I've thought for a long, long time, is always going to be centered around how we can make a patient's life better, how we can help a patient. We talk about patient-centered care, but I still see some people that are practicing hearing aid-centered care, and less and less. But it happens. I know it does. We all know it does, and we see it. But I think that if we are really going to move this profession to a place where what I believe most of us want it to be, and that's to be elevated, be that true doctoring status, achieve that doctoring status nationally, so that it's codified in law and regulation. I think that is going to be a really critical part of what we do. We have to focus on our practices. As you know, I believe very strongly that should be written down and agreed upon, and the word is standardized. And I think that's really important for our profession to do, because people are looking for those things. We've gotten in trouble before, and a lot of audiologists practicing today don't remember this. I was a pretty young professional myself, but in the late 90s, we were trying to change our practitioner status, change actually was trying to change some of the Medicare laws. And there was a hearing in Washington, D.C. about that. And we were pretty much slapped down. I mean, we were just kind of backhanded by the committee, because they looked through the things we had written. And everything we had written said, assess and manage. Assess and manage. You assess and manage. Mm-hmm. And so not evaluate and treat, or diagnose and treat. We didn't use that language. And so what we write down and how we talk about ourselves is really, really important. And what we do in that realm, I think, is going to be a big part of what audiology does become. But I'm going to go back to a conversation that Dean and I had on one of our early audiology talks, where we interviewed someone on the topic of genetics and stem cell therapy, and some of the treatments that might be coming up down the road. And of course, the thought on our minds was, is audiology going to exist in 50 years? If we can treat hearing loss, if we can regrow hair cells and restore this function, is our profession going to exist? And I haven't said who it was yet, because I'm struggling to remember who it was. Didn't plan talking about this story. I'm trying to remember who the heck we were interviewing. But I just remember she said, there's always going to be a need for audiologists. Always. Someone's got to test the hearing. Someone's got to monitor the progress. Someone's got to look at the outcomes. There are going to be people who aren't candidates. And so even in that example, if we somehow magically 50 or 100 years from now come up with this wonderful medical treatment that could restore hearing, there's still going to be a need for audiologists, but the need is going to be for us to do those kind of things that I just talked about. And so I think that's where our profession is headed and where it needs to.
Yeah, and I think that's where APSO has been doing such a great job of creating these standards for us. So when somebody does get in trouble in audiology, we have those standards already defined, so they don't get in trouble.
Yeah,
the profession doesn't get in trouble either.
Right. Well, yeah, well, both. But and we've talked a lot about that over the years. We've given some lectures, we've written things, we've had a couple 20 questions articles with Gus Mueller, and there's the next seminar is in hearing. If I think the current one's out, if it's not, then 2 down the road. But the second issue this year, I think, will have a lot of information about the recent adult hearing aid fitting standard, adult and geriatric standard. And so this information is getting out there. We've talked a lot about the legal reasons to do it, because we want the courts to have something we created to look at if they're going to judge us. They don't want them to come up with something. That's worked really poorly for professions in the past. Optometry being one of those. About 1972, there was a really significant decision that worked really poorly in their favor, or against them, I should say, not in their favor. And we talk about things like that. But I've been thinking a lot about bringing this to every audiologist and everyday practice, because that's what's really important. And when we talk about standards and we talk about what a standard is versus what a guideline is, just the idea of standardizing our practices so that everyone is doing things the same. That doesn't mean every patient is treated exactly the same. And that's what guidelines are for. Guidelines come in and they say, well, if you have this condition of this patient or this comorbidity, this might be a better thing to do. If you're in this situation, this would be the gold standard. This would be the best thing to do, but we recognize sometimes you can't for some reason. So here are some other things you can do. They give us that flexibility and say, based on your professional judgment, after we're practicing to our standards, then here's where you make those clinical decisions about what you need to do. But we've got to have the standards in place. We've got to be standardized on what we're doing with each patient that comes into our practice, especially for routine care. And to kind of illustrate how important that is, think about the flip side. Think about if we're not standardized. Everybody's doing something different. How does it impact our relationship with providers, physicians, and other providers? They have no idea what they're going to see coming from an audiologist. They can't coordinate care. They can't depend on what we're telling them. They can't plan on what we're going to come at them with. Totally undermines that relationship with other providers. Support staff, especially if you're at a bigger facility. If you've got 5 or 6 or 10 or 20 providers and they're all doing things differently, how in the world are your assistants and your administrative people and your billing people supposed to deal with that? You're totally wasting time and energy and resources and making them work much less effectively. Patients, if a patient can't go to 3 or 4 different places and get generally the same outcome, then patients lose faith in what they're doing. And they don't see, for one example, that what we're doing may be above the level of a hearing aid dispenser. How can they see that when they're not even seeing the same outcomes from audiologists?
Right.
And when you take all these things together, then people lose faith in the profession when we're not standardizing our practices. Insurance companies come along and they look at what they're going to pay and how much they're going to pay and what have they got to go on. And so I think these are the everyday things that developing practice standards really affect. And these are the things we need to be thinking about and why it's so important to us to have these for our daily practice.
Yeah, and I'll put the link down in the bio below for the Audiology Practice Standards Organization. It's just audiologystandards.org, but I'll have it right down below in the bio so you can click on it. You're a busy man, so you're involved in so many things. You're doing so many things. Before I let you go, do you have any final thoughts for our audience?
Gosh, all I can say is never stop being curious. As a professional, as a provider, as someone taking care of patients, I think the best thing that you could ever do is lose your curiosity in audiology, because that's what's going to drive you. That's what's going to keep you reading the journals. That's what's going to have you looking for new and innovative ways to help your patients. That's what's going to keep you interested in the profession and moving forward. I heard years ago that physicians generally figure that if they're going to go to someone, let's say for surgery, they generally want to go to someone that's about 10 to 15 years into practice, because that's when they find that it's the best ratio of a younger physician who doesn't have the skills, having developed those skills, but not being so old that they're not keeping up with the profession anymore. And that's that balance. And, we have this luxury for those who are in our generation of audiology that we went back to get our doctorate. So I kind of feel like in my life, I extended that timeline because I went back to school for 2 more years and expanded and improved my practice. But for me, I think that's really the top thing is I hope you love this profession. And if you do, I hope that keeps you curious and interested and intrigued in it so that you're always searching, always looking to improve, always looking for that next thing and how you can use it to make your patient lives better.
Well, that's awesome. Using that same logic, I had my AUD 15 years ago, and I'm coming up on 20 years as an audiologist this this May. So I guess I fit right in that window. So
there you go.
Thank you, John. From the bottom of my heart, I mean, for everything you've done for the profession, even just as our, with our friendship, I really appreciate you, and I really appreciate everything you've done. And I'm sure everyone who's watching does as well. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. John Coverstone, thank you again. Stay tuned for our next episode coming out very soon. Thanks.
Thanks.